Sarah Williams never imagined that at 17 she would be walking through the hallways of Jefferson High School for the last time, carrying on her shoulders the weight of shame and in her womb a life that grew in secret. The morning was crisp in suburban Chicago, the October sun filtering through the tall windows of the school as she clutched the sealed envelope that would seal her fate. Inside, the expulsion letter signed by Principal Robert Mitchell himself, a man respected in the community, married for 22 years to Linda, a prominent figure in the local Baptist church and PTA president. "Miss Williams," he had said 3 days earlier, when he called her into his office lined with dark wood panels and framed diplomas, "a young lady in your condition cannot continue attending this institution. We must think of the moral implications for other students, the example this sets for our community." His words came out measured, cold, while his eyes avoided hers, as if she were a complete stranger, not the girl he had been meeting in secret for months during late afternoons, when the school was empty and only the echo of his promises of love resonated through the silent corridors. Sarah had met Robert at the beginning of the school year, when she was transferred to Jefferson High after her father's sudden death in a car accident, leaving the family without resources. Her mother, Grace, worked double shifts as a nurse at the local hospital to pay for their mortgage and living expenses, believing that keeping Sarah in the good school district was the only way for her daughter to escape the financial struggles that surrounded them. Robert noticed Sarah from the first day, not just because of her natural beauty that was blossoming in adolescence, but because of the intelligence that shone in her green eyes when she discussed literature in the advanced placement English classes he taught in addition to his administrative duties. The meetings began seemingly innocently. Robert offered tutoring sessions, explaining that Sarah needed to catch up with the rest of her AP class. She, grateful for the attention, and dazzled by the culture and eloquence of a man 43 years older, didn't notice when academic compliments transformed into comments about her appearance, when hands that turned book pages began to touch her shoulders, when glances lingered longer than they should. Robert was skillful with words, knew exactly how to make a teenager feel special, unique, mature beyond her years. "You're different from the other girls, Sarah," he would whisper during those clandestine afternoons. "You have an old soul, a depth that your age doesn't reveal. Most girls your age are obsessed with social media and meaningless drama. But you understand real literature, real emotions." And Sarah, fatherless and craving the male validation that would affirm her worth, drank every word like water in the desert. When Robert finally kissed her for the first time, on a rainy afternoon in late September, while they discussed The Great Gatsby, she felt she had found her destiny, her great love, even though it was forbidden. The following months were an emotional roller coaster of secret feelings. Robert alternated between moments of passionate tenderness and professional coldness that left Sarah confused and anxious. He said they needed to be discreet, that their love was too special to be understood by others, that she should trust him and wait for the right moment when they could be together openly. Sarah believed every promise, every justification, every stolen kiss behind closed doors. When she began feeling morning sickness in November, Sarah initially attributed it to the stress of her studies and the tension of maintaining the secret relationship. It was only when her period didn't come for the second time that the terrible reality began to form in her mind. Alone in the bathroom at home, staring at the pregnancy test that confirmed her worst fears, Sarah felt her world collapse. At 17, still in her senior year of high school, she was pregnant by the school principal, a married man who represented everything she admired and respected. The conversation with Robert was devastating in a way Sarah could never have imagined. When she sought him out in his office on a Thursday after classes, her hands trembling as she held the pregnancy test like evidence of what existed between them, his reaction was one of complete denial, followed by cold, calculated accusation. "That's impossible," he said, rising from his chair with an expression Sarah had never seen before, a mixture of anger and contempt that completely transformed the face of the man she loved. "You must be mistaken, or worse, you must be trying to blackmail me. A girl your age, from your background, is capable of anything to benefit herself." The words fell on Sarah like physical blows. Robert continued, his voice now assuming a condescending tone she knew well, but which now sounded cruel. "If you really are pregnant, and I doubt it, it's certainly not mine. A young woman like you, who accepts secret meetings so easily, probably has other relationships you haven't told me about. Don't try to stain my reputation with your teenage fantasies." Sarah tried to argue, to remind him of the intimate moments they had shared, of the promises he had made, but Robert interrupted her with a coldness that froze her blood. "I suggest you contact your mother and resolve this situation in the best way possible. And I strongly recommend that you don't spread unfounded rumors about me or any member of this institution. That could have very serious consequences for you and your family." The threat was clear, and Sarah left his office in shock, still holding the pregnancy test that now seemed to burn in her hands. In the following days, Robert treated her with professional coldness that bordered on hostility. When other teachers were present, he completely ignored her. When they were alone in the hallways, his gaze was one of silent warning. Telling her mother was another ordeal. Grace Williams had sacrificed so much to keep Sarah in the good school district that the news of the pregnancy felt like a personal betrayal. "How could you be so irresponsible?" she cried, tears mixing anger and disappointment. "I work 16-hour shifts to give you opportunities I never had, and you throw them away because of some boy." Sarah couldn't tell her about Robert. His threats echoed in her mind. And besides, part of her still believed he would come back, that he would acknowledge their child, that everything would somehow work out. So she remained silent, allowing her mother and the entire community to believe she had gotten involved with some boy her age and been abandoned. The expulsion from school was executed with cruel, bureaucratic efficiency. Robert called Sarah and her mother for a formal meeting, where, in the presence of other board members, he explained that the institution's policy did not allow pregnant students to continue studying, as this could negatively influence other students and go against the Christian values of the school district. "We understand this is a difficult situation for the family," he said, with the same voice Sarah had heard whisper words of love just weeks before. "But we must think of the greater good of our school community. We hope Miss Williams can resume her studies at another institution more suited to her current situation." Sarah watched the man who had promised to love her forever sign her expulsion with the same pen he had once used to write small romantic notes that she kept as treasures. Grace tried to argue, to plead for a second chance, but Robert was inflexible, hidden behind regulations and policies he himself had helped create. The following months were the darkest of Sarah's life. Expelled from school just months before graduation, pregnant and rejected by the baby's father, she found herself confined to the small apartment she shared with her mother in a working-class neighborhood. Grace, though hurt and disappointed, gradually surrendered to maternal instinct and began supporting her daughter, especially when she realized Sarah was genuinely remorseful and willing to take responsibility for her actions. During the pregnancy, Sarah completed her studies through homeschooling and online programs, determined not to let her situation prevent her from graduating. She worked part-time at a local bookstore, saving every dollar for the baby's needs and dreaming of a future where she could offer the child a better life than she had experienced. It was during a prenatal checkup in her 8th month of pregnancy that Sarah encountered Linda Mitchell, Robert's wife, in the waiting room of the same doctor. Linda was visibly pregnant too, and when their eyes met, there was a moment of mutual recognition. Linda knew who Sarah was, the student who had been expelled from her husband's school for teenage pregnancy. "Sarah Williams?" Linda asked with genuine kindness. "Didn't you attend my husband's school?" Sarah confirmed nervously, expecting judgment or disdain, but Linda surprised her with compassion. "What a coincidence that we're here with the same doctor. When is your due date?" The two women, separated by 28 years of age and worlds of different experience, began a cautious conversation that proved surprisingly comforting. Linda shared that she had been trying to get pregnant for years, and this was her first successful pregnancy at 45. Sarah, in turn, shared her concerns about raising a child alone while being so young. "You're not alone," Linda said firmly. "It may seem scary now, but you'll discover a strength you didn't know you possessed. And besides," she added with a maternal smile, "I'm sure the baby's father will step up to his responsibilities when the child is born. Men sometimes take time to accept reality, but when they see their child in their arms, everything changes." Sarah felt a sharp pang of guilt and irony. If Linda knew that the baby's father was her own husband, that Robert had promised to be present but then denied everything. Sarah kept silent, but Linda's kindness touched her heart deeply. The birth happened on a cold December dawn. Sarah gave birth to a healthy boy she named Michael, in honor of the archangel who protects the innocent. When she held her son in her arms for the first time, all the pain, humiliation, and fears of the past months transformed into a fierce, protective love she had never experienced. Michael had her green eyes, but there was something in the shape of his face, in the curve of his nose, that inevitably reminded her of Robert. Grace completely melted when she saw her grandson. All the anger and disappointment she had carried for months evaporated when Michael grasped her finger with surprising strength for a newborn. "He's perfect, honey," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We'll take care of him together. He'll have all the love he needs." In the first months after birth, Sarah developed a routine that included caring for Michael, working at the bookstore when Grace could stay with the baby, and studying for college entrance exams. She had decided to study law, inspired by the injustice she had experienced and determined to help other women in similar situations. It was during one of those afternoons, studying at the public library, that Sarah received an unexpected call from Linda Mitchell. Linda had given birth to a daughter, Emma, just 2 weeks after Michael, and wanted to meet Sarah so they could share experiences about new motherhood. "I know it might seem strange," Linda said over the phone, "but I feel we have a special connection. 2 new mothers facing this wonderful challenge. I'd really like you to meet Emma, and I'd love to meet Michael." Sarah accepted the invitation with conflicted feelings. Part of her felt guilty about accepting Linda's friendship, knowing what she knew about Robert. But another part yearned for the company of someone who could understand the challenges of motherhood, especially someone as kind and non-judgmental as Linda had proven to be. The meeting took place at a cozy cafe in downtown Evanston on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Linda arrived pushing an elegant stroller where baby Emma slept, a baby with rosy cheeks and light brown hair. Sarah arrived with Michael in her arms, dressed in the best clothes she owned, clean but visibly second-hand. "How beautiful he is!" Linda exclaimed genuinely upon seeing Michael. "And what expressive eyes! May I hold him?" Sarah handed her son to Linda, watching how she held him with the natural experience of someone who had waited a long time to be a mother. "He has such a serious expression for such a small baby. He looks like he's thinking about important things." The two women spent the afternoon talking about the joys and challenges of motherhood. Linda shared her concerns about being an older mother, while Sarah talked about her fears of raising a child while being so young and without many resources. Linda offered clothes that Emma had outgrown, educational toys, and most importantly, her sincere friendship. "You know," Linda said while watching Michael play with Emma on the blanket spread on the cafe's outdoor area, "sometimes I think God places people in our lives exactly when we need them. You remind me that being a mother doesn't have a right age, just the right heart." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. Linda's kindness contrasted so sharply with Robert's cruelty that she almost confessed everything right there. But thinking about the consequences for Linda, for Emma, for Michael, made her keep silent. The friendship between the two women developed over the following months. Linda became a maternal figure for Sarah, offering practical advice about childcare, emotional support during difficult moments, and even discreet financial help when needed. Sarah, in turn, brought youth and energy to Linda's life, who had isolated herself somewhat during the years of failed pregnancy attempts. When Michael turned 1, Sarah had secured a partial scholarship to study law at Northwestern University. Linda offered to help with Michael's care during classes, an offer Sarah accepted with gratitude mixed with guilt. Watching Linda lovingly care for her son while not knowing the child was actually her grandson created constant emotional tension in Sarah's life. Robert remained a ghostly but constant presence in Sarah's thoughts. She occasionally saw him from afar during community events or at church, always accompanied by Linda and now by Emma. He never greeted her, never acknowledged Michael, maintaining the charade that he had no connection to them. Sarah wondered if he saw any physical resemblance between himself and Michael, if he felt any remorse or curiosity about the son he had rejected. The college years were challenging but transformative for Sarah. She excelled academically, specializing in family law and women's rights. Her personal experience gave depth and passion to her academic work, and she began interning at a non-profit organization that helped women victims of abuse and exploitation. It was during her 3rd year of law school that Sarah began working on a case that would lead her face to face with her past in an unexpected way. A 16-year-old girl had sought help from the non-profit, claiming she had been sexually abused by an authority figure at her school. The girl, trembling and scared, told a story that sounded terrifyingly familiar to Sarah. "He said I was special," whispered the girl during the first consultation, "that I was more mature than other girls my age. He gave me private tutoring after school, and gradually things changed. When I got pregnant, he said I was lying, that it must have been some other guy. Now they want to expel me from school for inappropriate behavior." Sarah's heart raced. "What's the name of your school?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Jefferson High School," the girl replied. "The principal is Mr. Robert Mitchell. He was the one who did this to me." Sarah needed all her years of training to maintain professional composure. She was sitting before another victim of Robert, another young woman who had been manipulated and then abandoned in the same cruel way she herself had experienced. The difference was that now Sarah had knowledge, resources, and determination to do something about it. "You're not alone," Sarah said, unconsciously echoing the words Linda had told her years before. "We're going to fight for you, but I need you to understand this will be difficult. He's a respected figure in the community, and there will be people who won't want to believe you." The young woman, whose name was Jessica, nodded with determination that reminded Sarah of herself at that age. "I know it will be hard, but I can't let him do this to other girls, and I can't let them expel me from school when he's the guilty one." Sarah spent the following weeks carefully building the case. She interviewed Jessica repeatedly, documented all evidence, and began discreetly investigating whether there were other victims. What she discovered was even more disturbing than she had imagined. During his 18 years as principal of Jefferson High School, Robert had used his position to approach at least 7 vulnerable young women, always following the same pattern. He offered academic help, gained their trust, initiated inappropriate relationships, and then abandoned them when the situation became complicated. The decision to reveal herself as another victim was one of the most difficult of Sarah's life. It meant exposing Michael to the truth about his paternity, potentially destroying her friendship with Linda, and facing the man who had shaped so much suffering in her life. But it also meant giving voice to all the young women Robert had hurt and possibly preventing him from making new victims. Sarah chose to tell her mother and Michael first, who was now 6 years old and beginning to ask questions about his father. Grace received the revelation with a mixture of anger and relief. Anger at having been deceived for so long, but relief at finally understanding why Sarah had been so reserved about the father's identity. "I knew there was something more," Grace said, hugging her daughter. "A girl like you wouldn't get involved carelessly with just anyone. Now, I understand why you were so secretive about it. But honey, you can't carry this weight alone anymore." Telling Michael was more complicated. How do you explain to a 6-year-old child that his father was a man who had hurt his mother and other people? Sarah chose a simplified but honest version. "Michael, you know how we sometimes talk about your daddy? Well, he's someone who hurt Mommy when she was younger, and that's why he can't be with us. But that doesn't mean you're not loved. You have Mommy, Grandma Grace, and Aunt Linda who love you very much." Michael processed the information with the seriousness that had characterized his personality since he was a baby. "Is he a bad person?" he asked simply. "He did bad things," Sarah responded carefully. "But Mommy is going to make sure he's held responsible for those things, so he can't hurt anyone else anymore." The conversation with Linda was devastating in a completely different way. Sarah asked to meet her alone, without the children, at a cafe where they had met so many times over the years. Linda arrived smiling as always, ready for another afternoon of friendly conversation about motherhood and life. "Linda," Sarah began, her voice trembling despite all her preparation, "I need to tell you something that will change our friendship forever. And I ask that you listen to me until the end, before reacting." Linda frowned, noticing the seriousness in Sarah's tone. "Of course, dear. What's happening?" Sarah took a deep breath and told everything. She spoke about the meetings with Robert when she was a student, about the promises he had made, about how he had rejected her when she got pregnant, about the expulsion from school, and finally about Michael being Robert's son. Linda listened in growing silence, her face going through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, painful understanding, and finally, deep sadness. When Sarah finished, Linda remained silent for several minutes, looking at her own hands. Finally, she raised her eyes, which were full of tears, but also of a determination Sarah didn't expect. "I believe you," Linda said simply. "And this explains so many things I never understood about Robert. The late meetings at school, the way he sometimes got strange when I mentioned you and Michael, the way he avoided events where you might be present." Sarah prepared to lose the most important friendship she had developed in her adult life, but Linda surprised her once again. "Sarah, I need to ask your forgiveness," Linda continued. "For all these years, I have been involuntarily complicit in the silence that allowed Robert to escape the consequences of his actions. I should have seen the signs, should have questioned more, should have protected you and all the other girls he hurt." "You didn't know," Sarah protested. "How could you have known?" "But now I know," Linda said firmly, "and now I need to decide what I'm going to do with this information. Sarah, I support you completely. Michael is my grandson, even though Robert never acknowledged him. Emma is his half-sister, and you became the daughter I never had. Nothing changes because of my husband's horrible actions." The conversation continued for hours. Linda asked difficult but necessary questions, trying to fully understand what had happened. She talked about signs she had ignored in Robert's behavior, about strange phone calls he received, about inconsistent explanations for his schedules. Most importantly, she promised her full support for the legal action Sarah was preparing. "He needs to be held accountable," Linda said. "Not just for you, but for all the other girls. And I'll testify if necessary. Our marriage, well, that's another conversation I'll have to have with him. But our friendship, the love I feel for Michael, that remains." The legal process against Robert began discreetly, but news spread quickly through the community. Sarah, now graduated in law and working as an attorney at the non-profit, officially represented Jessica and two other young women who had come forward after the first complaint became public. Unofficially, she was also one of the victims, though she chose not to press criminal charges due to the time that had passed and the difficulty of proving the case after so many years. The community's reaction was divided, as Sarah had predicted. Some supported the brave young women who had spoken out against an authority figure. Others defended Robert, claiming he was being unfairly persecuted by troubled girls who wanted money and attention. The church where Robert and Linda attended split in half, with some parishioners supporting Linda and others questioning why she wasn't defending her husband. Robert vehemently denied all accusations, hiring the best lawyers he could afford and launching a defamation campaign against his accusers. He claimed the young women were being manipulated by radical feminist groups, that Sarah had personal motives to destroy him, and that his reputation was being assassinated by people with political agendas. The turning point in the case came when Linda decided to testify publicly. In an emotional press conference, she positioned herself alongside Sarah and the other young women, declaring that she completely believed the accusations against her husband and was divorcing him immediately. "For 25 years, I was married to a man I thought I knew," Linda said, her voice firm despite the tears. "Now I discover he used his position of authority to harm vulnerable young women, including a girl who became like a daughter to me. I cannot and will not remain silent. These young women deserve justice, and other girls deserve protection." Linda's testimony had a devastating impact on Robert's defense. The image of a devoted wife abandoning her husband to support his accusers was impossible to ignore or discredit. More victims began to come forward, some now adult women who had kept their secrets for years. During the trial, Sarah faced Robert face-to-face for the first time since her expulsion from school. He had aged noticeably, his hair now completely grey, his posture less imposing. When she entered the courtroom as the victim's attorney, their eyes met for a moment. There was something in them, recognition, perhaps even regret, but he quickly looked away. Sarah presented her case with the passion and knowledge that only a survivor could have. She detailed Robert's pattern of behavior, showed how he used his authority and charisma to manipulate vulnerable young women, and demonstrated the lasting impact of his actions on the victims' lives. During cross-examination, when the defense tried to question her personal motivations, Sarah maintained her composure. "My motivation is simple," she said clearly. "To ensure that no other young woman goes through what I and these other women went through. To ensure that men in positions of authority cannot use their power to exploit and then abandon vulnerable girls." The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Michael, now 7 years old, was brought to court. Not to testify, he was too young for that, but for a paternity test that Robert had finally been forced to take. When the results confirmed with 99.9% certainty that Robert was Michael's father, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Robert finally confessed. Facing irrefutable evidence and the weight of testimonies, he admitted to having maintained inappropriate relationships with several students over the years. He tried to minimize his actions, claiming the relationships were consensual and that he never intended to hurt anyone, but his confession was enough to ensure his conviction. The sentence was severe: 12 years in prison, loss of all educational credentials, payment of compensations to the victims, and permanent prohibition from working in education or any position involving minors. Jefferson High School was forced to completely review its student protection policies and implement training on abuse prevention. After the trial, Sarah found herself in a strange position. She had achieved the justice she sought, but legal victory didn't erase the years of pain and confusion she had lived through. Michael now knew the truth about his father, and although Sarah had tried to protect him from the most sordid details, he was aware that his father had done bad things and was in prison. Linda kept her word about continuing to be part of Sarah and Michael's lives. She finalized the divorce quickly and used her share of the assets to establish a foundation dedicated to helping young victims of sexual abuse. Sarah became the foundation's legal director, finding purpose in transforming her painful experience into a force for good. Years passed, and the wound began to heal genuinely. Michael grew up knowing the truth about his origins, but surrounded by so much love and support that it never defined his identity. He became a compassionate and determined young man, inspired by his mother's strength and Linda's kindness, whom he always considered his true grandmother. Emma and Michael grew up as siblings of the heart, even knowing they shared the same biological father. The friendship between Sarah and Linda transformed into a strong and lasting family partnership, proving that even from the most difficult situations, something beautiful and redemptive can be born. Sarah never married, choosing to focus on her career and Michael, but found fulfillment in a life dedicated to justice and protecting other women. She often said that while she couldn't change what had happened to her, she could ensure her experiences served to protect other young women from going through the same suffering. Sarah's story spread far beyond Chicago's courtrooms, inspiring changes in educational policies throughout the state and giving courage to countless other women to speak about their own experiences. She had started as a vulnerable and silenced teenager, but transformed into a powerful voice for justice, proving that even in the darkest moments, truth and courage can prevail. Robert served his sentence in prison, where, according to reports, he finally faced the reality of the harm he had caused. He never tried to contact Michael or claim any parental rights, understanding perhaps that his son was better off without his destructive presence. 10 years after the trial, Sarah received an unexpected letter. It was from a young law student from Milwaukee who had read about her case in the newspapers and decided to follow the same career inspired by her story. "Miss Sarah," the girl wrote, "I want you to know that your courage saved more lives than you imagine. When I was 15, a teacher tried to do to me what that principal did to you. But I knew your story, knew I had rights, knew I could fight. I reported him immediately, and today he's in prison. Thank you for teaching me that being young and vulnerable doesn't mean being defenseless." Sarah kept that letter along with hundreds of similar ones she had received over the years. Each one represented a changed life, a protected young woman, a cycle of abuse interrupted. It was in these moments that she knew every tear shed, every sleepless night during the trial, every moment of courage in the face of fear had been worth it. Michael, now 17, had become a young activist for children's rights. He frequently accompanied Sarah to lectures at schools, where he shared his unique perspective as a survivor's son. "My mother taught me that our past doesn't define our future," he would tell audiences of attentive teenagers. "What defines our future is how we choose to use our experiences to help others." Emma, Linda's daughter, grew up seeing Sarah as a second mother and specialized in child psychology, dedicating her career to helping children who had suffered trauma. The two siblings by choice worked together at the foundation Linda had established, creating a legacy of healing and protection that extended far beyond their own experiences. On a sunny spring afternoon, Sarah was in her office at the foundation when she received a call that made her stop everything she was doing. It was from the principal of Jefferson High School, the same school from which she had been expelled decades before. "Ms. Williams," he said respectfully, "we would like to invite you to be our keynote speaker at this year's graduation ceremony. We believe your story of overcoming injustice is exactly what our young people need to hear." Sarah accepted the invitation, knowing that closing this circle would be important not only for her, but for all the young women who would sit in that audience. On the day of the ceremony, she walked through the same hallways where she had once been humiliated, but now as a strong, respected, and admired woman. As she stepped onto the same stage where Robert had once given empty speeches about morality and character, Sarah felt deep and complete peace. "Young people," she began, looking at hundreds of hopeful faces in the audience, "you are at the beginning of a journey that will sometimes be difficult, sometimes unfair, but always yours to define. Remember that your voice matters, that your truth has power, and that you should never ever allow anyone to make you believe you are less worthy of respect because of your age, gender, or social background." At that moment, seeing young people applaud her words in the place where she had once been silenced, Sarah knew she had managed to transform her greatest pain into her greatest triumph. The scared girl who had been expelled from that school had become the woman who now inspired a new generation to never accept the unacceptable and always fight for what is right. After the ceremony, while walking through the school gardens with Michael and Linda by her side, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey she had traveled. Every scar in her heart had become a source of wisdom. Every tear shed had watered the growth of her inner strength. Every moment of despair had been transformed into unwavering determination. "Mom," Michael said softly, placing his hand on her shoulder, "you know you changed the world, don't you?" Sarah smiled, looking at the young man her son had become, then at Linda, who had chosen to stand by the truth even when it meant destroying her own previous life, and finally at the students who were still excitedly discussing her speech. "I didn't change the world alone, sweetheart," she replied. "We changed it together. Every person who chose to believe, every young person who found courage to speak, every mother who protected her daughter, every educator who implemented new protection policies. We changed the world, one courageous choice at a time." That night, Sarah wrote in her journal, a practice she had maintained since the darkest days of pregnancy. "Today I understood that our story was never about revenge or punishment. It was always about transformation, transforming pain into healing, silence into voice, injustice into change." Michael asked if I changed the world, but the truth is that the world changed me first, taught me that even from the most impossible situations, something beautiful and redemptive can be born. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson I can leave, that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by what we choose to do with what happens to us. And with those words, Sarah closed not only her journal, but a chapter of pain that had been transformed into decades of purpose, proving that some stories, even beginning in the deepest darkness, can end by illuminating the path for countless other people.